this lesson, we're going to talk about similar and congruent figures. Congruent figures are two figures that have the same size and the same shape. The symbol that we use to indicate congruency is the symbol that you see here. So it's basically an equal sign with a little tilde swirl on the top of it. Now, take note down here. Be really careful not to confuse this symbol with the symbol that just has these two little tildes. This symbol that you see here means approximately. So they're not the same thing, so be careful with that. Now, what similar means is that you have two figures that are the same shape, but they're different sizes. So one's bigger and one's smaller, as you can see here with my two squares. The symbol that we use to indicate similar is one of these little tilde symbols. So be sure to recognize the difference between the congruent symbol and the similar symbol. Let's go ahead and just take a look at the bottom shapes and see if we can name a set of congruent and a set of similar figures below. Let's just go ahead and name one set. Let's go ahead and start with congruent. So congruent meaning same shape and same size. I would say that E would be congruent to J. So those two shapes would be congruent to one another. And let me go ahead and change my pen color here. If I'm looking for two similar figures, I could probably say that C and I are similar figures. So one's larger than the other. And there are a couple other options to choose from in there, and you probably see those there. But I just wanted to show you one congruent and one pair of similar figures. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about this idea of congruency and similarity. All right, let me go grab my pen here. All right, we're going to talk about corresponding sides and angles. So it says here, name the corresponding side lengths and angle measures. So here we have two triangles. And by this little symbol up here at the top, it's saying that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. So these two triangles that you see here are congruent to one another, which means they have the same size and the same shape. So when you have two figures that are congruent, that means that they have things called corresponding angles. So let's go ahead and look here. I'm going to choose an angle to start with, angle A, and this symbol right here means angle. So angle A corresponds to angle D. You can see that up on my triangles, they're in the exact location on the triangle. So they correspond to one another and they're equal to one another. Let's go ahead and choose another one. B. Angle B corresponds to angle E. And the last one here, angle C corresponds to angle F. Okay. Now, what's kind of unique about this is not only could we use the figures here, but we could also use the little indicator up at the top, and we can actually indicate corresponding angles that way too. Let me show you how. If you look here, angle A corresponds to angle D. See how they're in the exact location of where they're listed? Angle B is in the exact same location as angle E. And angle C is in the exact location of angle F. So you can use that as well if you don't have two pictures of triangles in front of you. Now let's talk about side lengths. Let's talk about corresponding sides. I have side length AB. Now the way that I indicate a side length is with a little line over the top of it. So if I look at AB, that's right here. This is going to correspond to side length DE. Now you need to be very careful because if you start with A and go to B, you need to start with D and go to E. You can't do something like AB is the same as ED. It doesn't work that way. You could also look back up in your little box up here and you can say, okay, well, AB, this side length corresponds to DE. You can use either one to find corresponding side lengths. All right, let's try this one. BC, line segment BC, is the same as EF. And then the last one, let's go ahead and say CA CA is the same as FD. So those are corresponding angles and sides of these two congruent triangles. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper with this concept now. Now we want to determine if two figures are congruent and if two figures are similar. Now there are there's different ways to do this. Let's take a look at this. It says determine if the figures are congruent. So we're just going to be testing for congruency right now. We're not going to think about the similarity yet. There are two things you have to do in order to determine if two figures are congruent. Number one, you have to ask yourself, are corresponding angle measures equal? So if we look at our triangles here below, we can look at the angle measure 52 degrees. Now you can see that the triangle next to it is flipped over. So his corresponding angle is going to be 52 degrees. So these two are equal. And you also want to go ahead and test the other ones as well. And you can see that the angle measures are equal. If that is the case, then the first test of congruency is finished. The other thing you have to do to determine if the two figures are congruent is ask yourself, are corresponding side lengths equal? So I like to start with this bottom one. You can see that the measure is 5 inches, and up here it is also 5 inches. And do the same thing for the other sides as well. And you can see that, yes, they are indeed the same length. So therefore, since both of those two tests conclude that they are true, these two figures are congruent. Now let's look at similar. If we want to determine if two figures are similar, we have to do these two tests. Number one, are corresponding angle measures equal? So we have to do exactly what we had to do for congruency. So let's just go ahead and check. We can see that 29 degrees and 29 degrees match up. 109 and 109 match up. 42 and 42 degrees match up. So, okay, number one, we're good to go. But this is the test that actually requires a little bit of work. We have to ask ourselves, are corresponding side lengths proportional? Let me show you how to do this. So I'm going to change my pen color real quick so I can show you this. What I want to do is indicate figure 1 and figure 2. Pick which one you want to work with. I'm just going to call this figure 1, and I'm going to call this guy figure 2. And what I need to do is set up a proportion of my side lengths. So I'm going to start with this long side length here. Notice that it's 10 inches. He's on my figure 1. So where it says figure 1, I'm going to put 10 inches. His corresponding side length is this guy down here, who's 5 inches. He's on figure 2, so I'm going to indicate it there. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose the other side length. So I'm going to change my pen color so I can explain this. I'm going to choose this side length, which is 6 inches. So I'm going to put 6 inches here, and he corresponds to this side length, which is 3 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and choose one more color here. This side length is 4 inches, and this side length is 2 inches. So now what I want to do is I want to ask myself, are these side lengths proportional to one another? Meaning, do they create the same ratio? So we know that 10 divided by 5, that's this guy over here, is going to equal 2. We know that 6 divided by 3 is going to equal 2. And 4 divided by 2 is going to equal 2. Each one of those individual ratios gives us an answer of 2. Because they are all the same answer, that means that these two, they satisfy the second thing, which says corresponding side lengths are proportional. So are they equal ratios? Yes, they are. And therefore, these two figures are similar. All right, let's look at a couple more. Determine if the figures are similar or congruent. So I always like to check for congruency first because I find it to be easier than the similar. So congruent. Let's see if these two are congruent. So we have triangle ABC, and I'm actually going to write it like this. Triangle, let me write it down here. Triangle ABC and triangle, let's see what this, you can see that it's flipped over. So you actually have to rewrite it as X, Y, Z. We want to see if these two are congruent. So we know that the angle measures have to be equal. So we go ahead and check those, and they are. So now let's check the side lengths. Are the side lengths equal to one another? And you can see that the side lengths here are not equal to each other. And the only thing I really looked at was this right here. Side length AB and XY, they're not congruent to one another. They're not the same. So if we want to say that these are congruent, it is not true. These are not congruent figures. But they may be similar figures. So again, with similar figures, we need to first test the angle measures, which we already tested. They are indeed equal to each other. So now we can check our side lengths. Let's see if they're proportional to one another. I'm going to go ahead and call this figure 1, and I'm going to call him figure 2. So figure 1, I'm going to go with that same side length of AB, and I'm going to put it right here, 12. And he corresponds to XY, which is 4. So if I were to simplify that ratio, that would simplify down to 3. So I'm looking for the others to equal 3 as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and change my color here. Let's go ahead and do the long side, the long leg here. 18 and 6. So 18 on figure 1 and 6 on figure 2. And if I simplify those give me 3 as well. So it's looking good so far. I'll choose one more color here. All right, this long side here is called the hypotenuse of a triangle. And let's see, 24 and 8. 24 divided by 8, okay, that equals 3. So what this indicates is that these two figures are similar to one another. They're not congruent. So I'm going to use a little tilde here saying that these two are similar. Now it says equal ratios down here, and the answer is yes, and my ratio ended up equaling 3. So that kind of told me that these worked out. All right, let's try another one. We have two, looks like nice little quadrilaterals here, looking kind of like a trapezoid. All right, so let's go ahead and indicate this figure as figure 1 and figure 2. And let's see if, let's go ahead and test them to see if they're congruent. All right, so congruent. Let's look at the angle measures first. Be very careful as you look at those angle measures. And it looks to me as if they are all equal. So, okay, check 1 is done. Now let's see if the sides are congruent as well. So choose a side. We can go ahead, let me choose a different color here. And this long edge is easiest to look at first. And then this long edge you can see is 104 centimeters. And we can kind of work our way around. And it looks like these are indeed congruent figures. So at this point, I'm pretty much done. I can say that these two figures are congruent to one another. And if they're congruent, they're not necessarily similar, because similar means that they're the same shape but a different size. But we've just proved that indeed these are actually both the same shape and size, so they're congruent. So really you don't need any of this information down here on this question. All right, let's go ahead and look at this question. Triangle STV and triangle ZXY are similar. Which pair of segments are corresponding sides of these triangles? So for this question, we're going to have some multiple answers here. So what I like to do is just indicate them using either a pen or, yeah, that's what I like to do. Or you could even, back up here it says triangle STV and triangle ZXY are similar. I could rewrite it like this. STV is similar to ZXY. And of course, those are triangles. And I could use this little thing to help me out as well to answer this question. But let's go ahead and look at it. Let's go ahead and look at, so we have the option ST here at the bottom. So let's go see who ST corresponds to. ST corresponds to ZX. So for this one, we could say that these two right here, actually here I'll circle it, ST and ZX. This could be one answer choice to this problem, and you could drag it into those two boxes here. But we could also have some different answers to this question. So let me go ahead and choose a different color. Let's try this one, TV. So TV is indicated right here, and TV corresponds to XY. So these two could also be two of your answer choices. And then, of course, we have one more answer choice that we could have here. So ZY is on this part of the triangle, and then that corresponds to SV. So we could also choose these two. So no matter what you chose here, it could be 100% right. You could also use this little thing over here. You could say something like ST corresponds to ZX. You could always use this in place of the figures, and especially if you don't even have the figures there. All right, that is the end of our lesson on similar and congruent figures.